What is up, beautiful people? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Who knows? I don't know. But we have Immortal Minds. We have ourselves another VOD analysis. And it's going to be an interesting one. We have the grand finals, the final map of the grand finals between G2 and FPX. I think it's fair to say the two best teams in Europe right now, both extremely promising in their gameplay, but definitely stylistically quite different as well. So lots to talk about in this episode. I am DDK, of course, and as ever, joined by Mike. How are you doing, Mike?
Doing good. We finally got some more tournament news, even though it's kind of broad, but better than nothing for 3 months, I imagine.
Yeah, it's weird. It was a 5 minute video, and effectively we learned maybe like three things. I'm going to say what it's called, First Strike. That is a hands-on Riot run tournament, which is the first so far in Valorant, and that it's an open system for people to like, so anybody can join it. You just need to be able to make a team, and there's some limited restrictions. I feel like that's it. That's all we learned from that 5 minute video. Is that about right?
Yeah, and that's just like obviously regional based 24 team qualifiers, and then I think 8 team finals, or like eight teams for each regional final in December. So it's going to be like a pretty lengthy event.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's. I would imagine as well, one of the things that maybe Riot's going to benefit from, presumably, is also maybe a better functioning observer mode of some description. So that's something that is already going to make whatever that is stand out. So and I imagine obviously they have the whole power of the Riot esports engine, as it were, to drive that content. So it should be really interesting, regardless, just because they are directly deciding that they are going to handle it and make that known. So. Um, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what other information trickles out over the next days and weeks in the lead up to that. And I suppose it's I suppose we should really start talking about this demo then, because I don't think there's anything else in the news is besides that.
Yeah, I don't think there is. So, do you want to just get started with the pistol, or do we want to talk about like the overall here at the what we thought of this match?
Yeah, we can start. We can start whites. Do you wanna lead us in?
I there's one round we'll see late where Mixwell gets that like 1v3 or 1v2 clutch, that I thought really turned the tide of the game, because as I was watching that live, I was like, I don't think FPX are gonna have the mental fortitude after losing that and being so close to closing it out that they're gonna be able to come back. But generally, I thought like G2 were just trying to manipulate like two things in this entire half of theirs, their attacking half, which was like Vents control and B Heaven control. And I felt like FPX were like really slipping all over the place on it and didn't have like the right counter adjustment to it.
Yeah, it feels like G2 kind of understands, or at least this demo to me was sort of going on your point or adding to your point, rather a good example of how to exploit how difficult the information game tends to be on this map for the defenders, and how you can just push and pull rotations pretty effectively. I think ultimately what really makes this half for me with G2 is something that we were talking about off camera, because even though it looks quite simple in terms of the game plan for G2 and what they're trying to do, it's really the fundamentals that tend to stand out and maybe will separate them from other teams. And that's something that we can perhaps go into in more detail. But I think that's the main thing for me. I actually felt like I was very impressed by FPX over this entire tournament, and individually and as a team, they seem like it really seems like their trajectory is going to surpass G2 if things can continue as they're going. But we'll see, I suppose.
Yeah, I think they're gonna definitely be like a top three team in the world with like all their setups, and obviously Angel's a really smart guy and they have a really good core of talented players, so I can't imagine they would start floundering all of a sudden for no reason.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, Angel's been a quite a revelation on this lineup. It's really amazing to see how many players have sort of rejuvenated themselves and their careers going into Valorant, and sort of, I suppose, not really feeling like they're burdened by their history in CS or whatever else might be burdening them, or maybe sapped some of the life from pursuing a professional career there. It's really cool to see how I mean, that's the thing that's that is unique to esports. I would say. I doubt. I mean, or at least I'm not very aware of anything in traditional sports where someone can be like, yeah, I'm just gonna piece out from this racket sport and go over to this other racket sport and be able to dominate. I don't know that it works like that quite as well in traditional sports. So I'm going to say that that's a unique thing for esports right now. And if anyone has any good arguments, tweet me. So right. This is an interesting one because I accidentally watched the upper finals first, Mike. And I only got a few rounds in, so that was okay. I didn't waste too much time. But it was
Spend an
actually not
hour.
even a waste because what I learned was that because these two teams obviously they played each other in the upper finals, what G2 did is they ran a pistol that was, I would say, the approach was very good, even though it didn't actually win them the round in the upper finals, and they represented the same pistol here, although it was different at the same time. So in the previous pistol, they had kind of a 1-3-1 setup initially, and they had David P, who was sitting in B main, and they were looking to kind of reset into a kind of a 1-4 split through male into the B side. So here it's a little bit different, and they sort of play on that expectation.
I think as well because I'm pretty sure FPX have played against G2 when they've done this other pistol strat where they either take like having control of mix while dashing out, or sometimes they just do it on like ecos, but just kind of like mix while buys them a lot of space and then they can walk like contact through piss cage. And FPX have like a really good counter to it at the start. So Shadow's gonna just fault line this entire part of A main right at the start of the round, and then Angel's gonna smoke deep. So that would be like a really good counter if G2 are just trying to do their contact setup again. So here comes that utility in, and then they're doing just their normal like mid control, kind of their more like 3-2 setup like you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's nice to have, to prevent potential punishes around the A ramp position if they were going for any kind of a B play. They don't just have Python there, which they can typically expect, but there's also, I think David P was over there who can guard against any early aggressions. And so then they reset out of that, and once they establish that there's no early aggression timing and going into this kind of 4-1, and then they bring Angel across with the spike. And I think G2 has such a tendency to go for those male hits. I think generally, if you're a team playing against them, that's something that's, I think, always on your mind. And playing a retake is something that just makes a bit more sense if you're playing against G2 in general, I feel like.
Yeah, they just have such a sick setup here because Shadow can flash behind, and he's just going to keep flashing for Angel in the back here. So these guys are all blind coming out, and then Angel can flash them as well. So they just have like such a good flash setup for anyone coming out of that one choke point.
And it's kind of crazy to how much time Angel had to even get that kill. It was so incredibly labored. Yet, as Mike mentioned, it's just such a solid answer to that a aggression. And again, this is one of those things where I feel like FPX, it felt like they were quite ready most of this half for what G2 were doing, even though G2 are abusing, as we will see, they're going to be abusing the lack of information that the defenders have, especially when you take away mid control and when you're too afraid to invest in mid control because maybe you're feeling like they can just run up onto the bomb sites. So you don't want to invest too heavily there because that would leave you too weak on the extremities. So women knows. All right, so G2 after losing that round are gonna just try to send it on mail here with all of the pistols. It's one of those, we talked about this before, this principle, Mike, where it's this idea of what is the quickest way to get onto a site with the least sort of choke points to worry about? How can they most effectively get through and most quickly and efficiently get through onto the site in that way with the least problems? And I think that's kind of what mail often ends up being because you get that high ground as well. You get to be able to deal with a lot of positions on site. So it's generally quite a cool answer, although it is defended pretty effectively here. And I was surprised not to see, maybe like a paranoia go all the way through. I'm not sure if there was one and I missed it, but I feel like there are, some other ways to make this run a bit better for G2.
Yeah, they just had the one breach flash, I think, so paranoia is definitely an option. I wanted to say as well, like that box that Shao was playing behind, I feel like every time I watch people play that spot, it seems like really good, but not a lot of people like playing there. Because I think it presents like a really good opportunity to have a crossfire with someone if they're on like the heaven balcony part. But there's just generally a lot of people that are scared of like someone jumping up on the box or people swinging them. But I feel like it gives you a lot more options in heaven because it's kind of awkward if you're holding back towards that like wooden stairs area from spawn, and then you're crossfiring a guy with on heaven balcony. It just seems like really awkward to try to hold heaven or get one or two kills that way to delay a push.
Yeah, it feels really vulnerable. Like it does seem like there's so much utility that can deal with that spot, and lots of different agents that have answers can have answers for it. I am still wondering if we're going to see Sovas start to come into play as we see some more. It might necessitate Vipers coming into play more, but I'm starting to think about situations on Split where and thinking, what would Sova add here? Because Sova, in terms of general strength on the map, gets less inherent options in terms of wallbangs and lineups and so on. But if you think about what is the meta game, like what is happening within the meta, how many solutions does Sova have for the meta? Then that's like a completely different layer that you're analyzing that agent from, in terms of what solutions and strength they may have in a particular meta. So those are two different ideas, and that's why we may see certain agents enter the meta that may be on certain maps where they may be otherwise kind of weak. But nevertheless, into the next one.
I was gonna say as well, especially like Xiao plays Sova on every map, and I think even in this event he was playing Sova on Split, but they swapped him out for Sage for the grand finals.
Ah, pussies? Question mark.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting setup here. So Angel just smoked off A main at the start of the round, so he's denying that early round information. Because I imagine after watching a few of G2's demos, he already recognized, okay, Pith is going to be here like every round, trying to stall and get information and deny information for the defenders. And then the other thing they're going to do here, so he's in the corner, getting ready to paranoia mid. So you can paranoia mid, and this is the thing with the Sage Wall. So now Xiao can put down the Sage Wall and cross the vents. And while they're blind, they like negate that 3-second timing where you can like spam it down when it's like vulnerable, even though they spam it down anyways, but it allows him to cross, no one gets the sound cue, and then also puts the wall down.
And I think here we're going to see as well, like just this dynamic of like how threatening it is for the defenders once they lose mid control, and G2 are going to have a great sense of how to really make that pressure really feel very desperate and make it so that you really don't know what they're going to do, and they can pull and push you around. And I like that we will end up seeing some abusive ropes here, and that's something that I haven't seen enough of in pro play, but we'll get into that. We get like the information play from Angel, and I like that a lot because, again, as we mentioned, it feels like you kind of need to take a risk at this point in the round when you've given up this much information. Because one thing that we've mentioned is how good G2 are when they get to just execute in great spacing, great fundamentals in that sense. So you want to try to get the info first. And it's after that kill from Angel, just the instant response to go A. And it's kind of in that sense a forced response. It's really the only best option after Angel got a kill and reset towards male. So it becomes down to the fundamentals.
Yeah, and FPX as well, we're going to play retake A because they hadn't seen anything at A, and they probably know G2 are very mid heavy from analyzing them a bit. And then G2's male hit was kind of divided up because they didn't have a smoke on ropes. So then that left like two people having to hold ropes, and you can see it here, and then two people fighting heaven because you're always going to be worried about, okay, maybe they have someone on ropes. If we go 4-up male, then they might just swing on us and destroy us. So they kind of got divided up there compared to how like normally G2 have like really good spacing and coordination, but that was a little bit different.
The smoke was an interesting one too. The dark cover that was in mail. Was that from Angel who actually threw that one?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was Angel that threw that one.
Okay, and I think that that's actually worth talking about in the sense that that smoke, we saw what Angel was able to do with it. You could say like a lot of people might just smoke the choke point because they're like, oh, I should stop the attackers from being able to breach my position, so I'm going to smoke the choke point. but he we could see that the way that he smoked it allowed that if he pushes through the smoke, he gets vision of top mid. And obviously there's a potential downside that the attackers could creep behind the smoke and be in like be heaven kind of. But in this instance, with the support that Angel had, and as Mike said, they're playing a retake, they're more invested towards that position anyway. And so it's I think that mitigates that risk. And so that's a kind of an interesting detail because having the ability to have that information is pretty huge. So shutting yourself off from it, obviously, it seems worse, and that's like a nice detail. It's a nice touch from Angel to think about the smoke in that way.
I think as well, like, the corner of that smoke should cover like a lot of breach flashes as well if they're like flashing through that right side of mail, so that should help. And like you said, even though you're giving them like mail in that little like corner in heaven, that's not really a lot of space. And it's better for them, or like it's better for you as a defender for them to try to come through that smoke rather than smoking like top of mail and then they can just swing through it with a flash.
Yeah, I totally agree. All these small details are really cool to see. And we could see in that run, it made the difference. Angel was able to peek through the smoke, get the kill, and that forced a rotation to A that FPX knew was a forced rotation, and therefore that allowed them to have the ability to win the round. So it's the smallest things can win you rounds in a game like this.
Yeah, and
Um,
this is another like really small thing at the start of this round that's gonna help them win this round. So on the main map, you can see they're playing like heavy B. They're leaving mid completely open. They just have the trips and the cages and vents and heaven respectively. And then Omen or Angel flash through B main, and then they're gonna slow it so Shao can get this orb. So now he's one off of his res, which is actually gonna come in pretty big later in this round. I also like this play by Padsec, so we kind of missed it a bit, but he smokes off ropes and then TPs into it because a lot of teams, especially, I know both G2 and FPX kind of abuse the fact that teams don't play ropes that often. And people always talk about like, oh, you can just leave a trips in rope, but I don't think that's like a super effective way to deal with it. Because if you're already that far in, you're probably going to commit regardless. I think Killjoy is kind of good in this area though, because if you have like your alarm bot and a molly in vents, that definitely delays and like kind of buys you more space.
yeah, and it's so important to punish this trip. You don't have to do it all the time. But just like the trip is just so cheap for them to put it there, and it's kind of this it's like a linchpin almost for the defender's rotation. Once that linchpin is pulled out, suddenly everyone is kind of flustered as to what is happening because the setup is reliant on having that trip to give warning as to whether there's anyone in the ropes position, and all of a sudden you don't know if the entire team could suddenly explode out of that spot. So it becomes really dangerous because the player who's playing dedicated on the A site becomes a lot weaker as well as he's in this engagement against people on the high ground. So we can't really stop anyone coming down. So that means that there's only really one player that can stop it, and it's the person who's playing a heaven. And obviously, with the right utility, that player can be neutralized pretty effectively. So yeah, and also the on top of that, the fact that if you know G2, you know that Python is almost always lurking to the A side of the map. So there's always that ability for him to actually pressure up towards a ramp as well. And if he's done that in one of these rounds, then it's even more threatening. So there's just so many problems with it, and it's so cheap to do this to actually remove it. The trip that is.
Yeah, and so they already got rid of the Be Heaven trip, and then they're going to get rid of this Vents one right now. So now FPX are in a spot where it's like, okay, we have no mid info at all. They have Vents control, they have Be Heaven control. So then the Angel, that actually draws out his Omen ult towards A. It would have been cool maybe to see if him like ult into mid just to get that info and fall off, or ult into ropes just to get info. But now they're just going to do that A split like you said. And this is going to put like a bunch of pressure on Zipan and Heaven because he's worried about not only ropes but Heaven ramp as well. So then he has to reposition because of that.
Yeah, there's Zipan's position is particularly difficult because his teammate his daddy on the site can't really afford to be deeper necessarily unless Shadow was already a ramp, which is kind of unlikely. he'd be so exposed to be in any position that could actually cover a ramp unless he's playing screens or elbow, and so that's kind of where he would otherwise have to be. So it's a tough one because if he's not there, and a lot of people, especially in the current meta, they want to try to anchor the site from backside because you get some better crossfires. It's more difficult for the attackers to deal with your position, especially if you're Omen as well. You can get some really nice paranoias as they're coming through the choke points. So you're more likely to hit more players with it, and you get more TP options and stuff, and more, and you get the ability to actually maybe get kills when they come into the site, which typically that's kind of an anchor's job is to make it so that sure if they take the site, at least they lose a couple players doing so. So it is quite a predicament, as you say. Like there is this huge lack of info on ramp, which puts, as we mentioned previously, Zipan in a horrible position. And what's really cool about it, another detail that I noticed about this, once Patatech did destroy the trip and forced out Angel's TP, as you said, towards elbow, it was they reset the situation. They just held for a while, and then there's just again there's this just confusion. There's this like moment of panic for the defenders' rotations that they have no idea what's happening. They have like they know that mid is compromised. They know that ropes is compromised, but now there's like this 5-10 seconds where they last knew that they could all be roped, but now they just don't know, and they've just rotated the entire team. So it's just awful. Like it's just an awful position to be in.
Yeah, and I think as well, like at the start of the round, we saw them fight B main just with the flash and the slow orb just to get that orb for Shao on Sage. It would have been cool if they Cypher cammed inside B main as well, because then you feel more comfortable stacking, right? Because, okay, we have a cam inside B main, we have all the info B main. It's like having a person in there. So then you're less worried about like giving up mid and playing more heavy A in general, because you actually have some information to play on. But like you said, they're like really lacking in the information department that round.
And that's just one of those problems on Split. That's just one of the things the top teams are going to have to kind of try to figure out on the defender side. Um, so, so yeah, I think that, I mean this is a really nice attack from G2. Currently, we're paused at a spot where they don't really have much post plant positioning, but that's actually not the end of the world, given the fact that they mostly came from ropes. And they were in mid last. It's actually quite unlikely that there's many players coming through that position. So they can probably assume most players are going to come through spawn or have to come through spawn. So we'll see if they get any better post plant positioning right now because there's all five of them at backside, which is never nice to see.
Yeah, and I thought the way they fought this was kind of weird because they had the reach ult if you really want to invest that, but they'd just fault line and flash once, but no one really swings on this guy on the right. So then you're like basically giving them a chance to recover. They get the kill, and then they just consistently keep fighting this area. So then Shao gets that extra kill, now he can res one. So now Artis is, you've gone from a 5v3 into a 1v2 in like the blink of an eye.
Yeah, this was really quite shocking. We saw I think in the Pulse Invitational, I think we saw some similar post plant scenarios. I think it was from Mamba mode actually, where they got really bogged down at the back of the A site, and they wanted to just take screens, but it didn't seem like the protocols around it were particularly good, as you mentioned. And maybe that's just something that needs to be some well, that maybe there are no protocols. Maybe some protocols need to be added to deal with this.
Yeah, because I think as well, like Mixwell had one smoke, so it's like, okay, you can smoke off like screens or heaven, but like you said, you just came through rope, so they're going to be very like hesitant to come through heaven in the first place. So at least you could like smoke off screen, someone could get into hell, just like reposition at least one or two people, because at least then you can kind of crossfire with those weaker weapons instead of like what we just saw, where it's a very like sloppy, inconsistent fight towards screens.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things where hopefully they've checked the demo after the fact, because that's one of those things that feels pretty easy to tighten that up, because it's one of those spots where they have a lot of time. They're not really under pressure to set themselves up there after they've gotten towards that A plant. But either way, the next round is going to be oh yeah. So there's a B main control play coming from FPX in this round. And I think that Artis is able to be wise to this. You can see he's throwing the paint bombs through. So they understand with that paranoia that that's a 2 or possibly 3-man setup. Um, so the question is, how do they deal with that? They see the wall in mid as well, which also tells them, okay, it's probably a 2-man setup. And because the Sage would have to be there, they saw already 2 abilities from B. And they decide that, okay, there's only 2 on A. We're just going to hit it really hard. Exactly like the last round, but just quicker.
Yeah, and I think FPX were kind of ready because they had like the trip towards A main and then one in ropes again, and then they had the cam in heaven as well. And Meadow does like such a good job at stalling back sight, so even though they trade him out, he just denies them for so long. So his teammates, by the time they rotate in, G2 aren't even able to get on the site. Like they can never cross in the site from hell. So then their FPX have like a really good position on them to stop them from even like putting them in a post plant scenario.
Yeah, the rounds like this were the ones which really impressed me from FPX because, as you say, it does come down to the individuals having to make some heroics happen, given the fact that they went for that early play. G2's counterplay, I think, is pretty perfect, honestly, because they know what they're walking into, because they know the setup. They plan on heaven, and then there'll be probably someone backside, and that's they just ran into that, so they should have the ability to, with that timing, knowing that there's 2 players really out of the way on B who won't be able to rotate quickly, that they can abuse the timing there, and it's like really as simple as that. And so I felt like that was a great call from G2. They were able to punish the B main control play in that sense, but at the same time, obviously, as mentioned, FPX, they are able to still win the round through good individual play.
Yeah, and then on this next round, this is something that I've noticed G2 also does a lot. So you can see Artis already is towards like the market position. And on these types of setups, they basically just leave him to be like a late work through ropes when they're doing this A setup. So this is kind of just like an A split, but he's solo working through mid. So they fault lined heaven in case anyone was peeking, and then Pith has done these cages a few times. So then they can just pop them any time, leaves them vulnerable to info on A for FPX. Then they just do this a lot, like we've said before. G2 just like contact up this entire time, and then they're just gonna get ready to walk through Piss's cage. And Artis has worked all the way up through ropes. And something I also really liked here, so that smoke, like that Mixwell throws that you can see right here, he dashes into it, so one that buys him space without like actually giving up his life, because obviously someone could just like shoot him because the A site's really open, and there's not a lot of good places to dash to, so that's one thing. But it also kind of blocks flashes if someone's like, if Shadow's flashing from back screens or back elbow, it really helps from that area as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, as you mentioned with Mixwell, because Jet's job is just to draw fire, draw attention, gain space for the team, and create problems with that presence. So I like that concept a lot. I think that's something that people can, if the Jet players are out there, watching this, they can apply that principle that you can set smokes down to dash into, because just the mere action of dashing in is extremely scary and draws a lot of attention and possibly utility as well. So
I think
it's
as
it's pretty good to see.
Yeah, and I think as well, like Mixwell, even though he was the first one out there with the dash, he recognized like in some of these rounds, okay, our post plant positioning has been really weak. So immediately after dashing out and making sure they had the site, he goes back and secures a main control. So they actually have like a decent post plant for once with some control.
It makes a world of difference just having one player in or other A ramp.
Yeah, and even though this gets kind of scary, these are like the situations G2 thrives in. So they fault line, then Pith can reposition towards back site, so now it's down into like a decent 1v1 even though he's low HP. And I think that's like the exact type of scenario that G2 just does a lot better in than the other teams. It's funny because I've watched, I can't remember which teams it was, but I've watched an exact same thing like that where 2 defenders are retaking through elbow, and there's 2 guys in that backside corner, and they had stuff to like displace the retakers, but they just sat in that corner and got doubled up. But like I said, like G2 are so good at using util like that to reposition, try to get a better advantage, even though it's like a super stressful situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's stuff like that that really. I think those rounds like where G2 are expressing that skill is really where I think they win this game. Generally speaking, and I think you mentioned actually I think in earlier on that there are some moments like that that we're going to be seeing more of them. And let's see. So the next one is going to be this is going to be a really good example of some of the things we were talking about previously. We already saw them destroy the trip on ropes and create problems for the defenders, but we're going to see the more push and pull here in terms of rotations from G2 as they're going to threaten the mail, they're going to threaten ropes, and GT and FPX will have no idea exactly what they're doing, and then G2 will end up going into their famed contact through mail, which usually ends up being quite good for them.
Yeah.
But the round starts off pretty much the same as it always does.
Yeah, so we're still seeing like a lot of respect towards mid. They're basically giving it up for free. The FPXs, they just have like the trip and mail. I think Zippin like even plays in vents here. So he's playing like dedicated vents because that's how worried they are about A splits now. They don't think the trip is enough, so now they're dedicating an entire player there. Pith dropped his cage over at A. I think eventually that's going to draw out a rotation from Angel here. Yeah, so he activates it. This pulls the rotation from Angel, so now they're ready for their mail hit with that cage. Because last round they obviously like contacted through it, and this round FPX didn't have anyone watching Heaven. So then here's their mail split that we talk about a lot. And I think they just stop here and double back, if I'm right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah,
they'll go for the ropes take afterwards.
yeah, so this is where like having that person dedicated ropes helped out a little bit compared to giving it up for free. It would have been nice if they did a little bit more util towards B to sell that fake from Heaven. Then they double back again. I think David P had like an ability out there because they didn't expect a second person, which kind of messed them up. And then this was the clutch that everyone saw. That was super sick. And I think Shadow like starts using utility because now I'll just pause it quick. You're in a position where you've already split yourselves up, and generally in these like situations where okay, he just planted, we know he has to be basically like spawn or backside somewhere, and you're basically isolating yourselves. And the other worst thing is you're using utility at the same time. So he hears Shadow like flashing and using other abilities. So now he knows, okay, this guy's vulnerable the entire time, so that's a free kill. And then Mixwell's just generally a good player, so he turns around and gets Angel. But that's just like a very bad misplay by FPX. And that was kind of the point when they lost that. I'm like, okay, this is like the tilting point for this team. And I think a lot of people always argued in Counter-Strike, like, oh, why would you call a timeout when the team's demo, or like when you just crush them on a round like that? It's like, well, you can just let them sit in that feeling that they just lost that round that they totally should have won. Like, you can see how like upset all these guys are on the player cam, and you can just let them like relish in that feeling.
Yeah, it's a really brutal one. Uh, it's so difficult to be in that position. Obviously, I would imagine that they would be able to like reset like well enough, but it is a really tough one to when you throw away enough good chances. If you respect the opposition a lot, you do in the back of your head start to think, I feel like I feel like I've thrown away too many good chances. Like this feeling can kind of creep up on you a little bit that you only get so many chances against a team like G2, and that may have been one of the best ones. So yeah, it's definitely a really rough round to lose. It's kind of a shame that they split up in the fashion that they did, but such is life, I suppose. Such is life. Those are the spots where G2 do really well.
Yeah, just take whatever the enemy gives them in those areas. And then this was kind of like a weaker buy from FPX. So obviously he's lost a massive round. And then Angel's just gonna, I'm pretty sure he just walks all the way through B main, and then they just gamble stack A. And it looked like G2 were kind of set up to May split A at the start, but then they get some sort of read or just get an idea, okay, we're just gonna abuse Mail again and commit to that. So there's walking all the way up mid. Angel doesn't want to TP because they would be close enough to hear it, or if he breaks a trip, they would know as well. So he just banks on the fact that maybe they're all just setting up for another like A split.
Yeah, just a gamble stack with the Python entertaining as always, and then just a B plan, which kind of just seals the deal in a situation like this. And again, we also talked about this previously. That if you have utility that's good enough to clear a position like mail, you're already able to deal with so many spots. Like you can have people that fall off onto the site to clear, the back corners, and like all those positions on the B site open up really nicely if you attack it from B heaven. So there's a really huge advantage if you can get B heaven control to make your anti eco round finish on B with that B heaven control as the sort of anchor point. And if you're able to have the utility to kind of deal with whatever could be dangerous of all these around all of these corners and be heaven, you're pretty much good to go. Like there's not really anything the pistols will really be able to do at that point. So I would say that's probably one of the strongest ways you can play an anti-eco on this map. There's always more than one option for that, but I think that's like definitely one of the strongest. So that's a good demonstration of that there from G2. Just some good fundamentals behind it, and then that leads us into a pretty interesting spot here. I think Artis doesn't buy a weapon in this next round because their plan is to just walk into B, which they haven't done before, and they do it with Artis's rocket ultimate is out. The showstopper is out, and I would presume that he doesn't buy a rifle because he knows he will die most likely. But his job is really just to clear space by popping that ult and trying to punish anyone who tries to take the 1v1 against him. And this was an interesting round to me, Mike, because G2, it feels like everything goes right for them, but they still don't manage to convert.
Yeah, and I think there's like a few mistakes they make along the way, so we can talk about those. But like FPX have made an adjustment here to start with, so now they're playing like super heavy mid. They've realized like, okay, we can't just keep giving up mid control and lacking info there because they're just abusing either like ropes or mail every time. So now they have two people in heaven, and then Zipan's playing dedicated vents, which is like the heaviest mid setup I think you'll probably see for a standard round for a pro team. But like you said, G2 are just gonna basically have a contact basically, except Artis is gonna be ulting out with his Raze ult. So yeah, he doesn't buy, he just buys armor and just has a ghost because he expects to die. So he'll go out. They don't give him anything because they smoked off heaven. They're playing behind it. And I think this is the part. Yeah, David P ults, and I'll just pause it quick to talk about that because like if his plan is, I think his plan is like, okay, I can delay them so they're in heaven and they're not instantly fighting us coming out, and then I can work through mid. Except Shao does something to negate that later. But the whole thing with the breachel is like it puts them in a position so when they're actually retaking, that you can totally stall them out, and that's when you can start taking the fights. Because I see it a lot where people, especially now, because there's more people using breach, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna use my breach ult, but there's no one that you can really get an advantage on. They're just kind of using it as like a stalling tactic, which only buys you like really 5 seconds at most. And when you're just getting the bomb down in this round, that's not really a lot of time because another ability, like a smoke or something, stalls for like a lot longer unless they push through it, but that's a disadvantage. But I just feel like a lot of breaches kind of like misuse their ults in this way.
Yeah, especially if you consider the fact that Breach is so good with the way that his abilities work that because of the nature of this round, as we can see, Breach is in B main or was in B main, so you can basically ult the plant from there. You can flash really effectively for your teammates from there. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can do from that position, and but Breach is out of the picture completely, like basically worrying about mid, and there's already a trip there as well. So it feels like for me, David Peach is out of the whole round, and in the most important parts of it,
Yeah.
actually.
I think he was gonna like late flank Heaven because he likes to do a lot of those late flanks on post plants, but Shao walled off Mail. So obviously, if you break that wall in Mail, they know you're there, so your flank is less effective. But at least you're still putting pressure on. So it's kind of like two sides of a coin. But yeah, because you can see he's facing mid right there, sees the wall, and then has to go all the way back towards B main. But if you
Mm.
had that breach ult like later, then you could have at least stalled for your teammates when FPX were retaking from Heaven.
Yeah, definitely some things I guess to tighten up there here or there for G2, but I like the idea though. Ultimately, I think it was a really cool round with sort of like the artists open with the and moving into the next round, we get a male contact with a fake ult or rather a an ult from Patatek that gets cancelled and a TP, which is basically just draws out attention to try to pressure A, and we get a male contact play off of that. Is sort of how this one ends up playing out, but it's kind of that typical start. Although Pyth is not the one who's lurking A, instead it is going to be Patatek.
Yeah, and he just like smokes off Heaven, then like you said, he ults in the elbow, draws that information, and then Pith has his cages as well. So then they're lacking the information there. It's also interesting to see like Zipan was playing in ropes with the trip, so they were that scared of another like A split again. Like you said, then they contact up B Heaven, and Shadow had some really good flashes out of spawn there to help Shao. Oh yeah, and then this part was like David P running around. Didn't expect someone to push through the spawn smoke. So they do really well to get this down to a 2v1, but Tech comes through with that late flank that we saw.
It's really cool, Harry, that you see that he jumps down because he expects that he has hit the paranoia on his opponent, which it kind of operates like a like he's gambling that his opponent will therefore not hear him dropping down, and so he's got to reposition out of the paranoia, as well as creating possible misplays from his opponent because of that period of lack of information during the paranoia. So ultimately, this is a great round from Patatek, given the fact that he was able to, with the cages from Pyth, who, as you mentioned previously, throws those A cages. And they also threw the dark covers there, and Patatek also goes for the TP towards elbow it's actually a very cheap fake actually ultimately and given how effective it really feels quite convincing given how even though it's very cheap to do it. And so that was actually I actually really liked that round quite a lot from G2. I felt like that was a pretty effective one in that sense. So they're just lucky that Patatech was able to obviously like close it out because things got a bit mad at the end.
Yeah, and obviously I think that changes a bit if like David P's just like holding a position and isn't like running knife out in front of the spawn smoke. But yeah, like with Omen smoke, two cages, and then Omen ult, they kind of sold an A hit and made three people like stay dedicated towards A. So that's like really good value for them. And then I think this next round was just FPX like actually contest A main at the start of the round. I think they just like smoke and then fault line it. Yeah, and then Angel walks up.
Yeah, and there's a few rounds where in case there's a punish on Pyth, who is just always like lurking that position, they will like hold an additional player there. It's because again that one of the ways you can try to punish a team that's going heavy into some of these contact plays is with some aggression, and especially given that Pyth's tendencies, it would be foolish of G2 to never have anybody in the early round timings there to help Pyth because teams will try to find a way to exploit Pyth being alone. But it develops out into like a male contact again with Pyth rotating back through spawn, leaving up the trips as per the usual. And normally Pyth would actually want to lurk through a ramp or lurk through mid, but this time he's actually going for the spawn rotation, which was an interesting choice.
I think it's just because by this point maybe G2 are thinking like, okay, every time we've gone B, we haven't really had someone like come late B main. We've always just had like 4 or 5 come through Heaven. which I think would help a lot with their splits. Is like if you have like one or two people late lurking, through like A main or B main. And then the other thing is like FPX have like no info at all anywhere on the map. Like they tried to contest A early, they destroyed Piss Cam, but obviously he could still be there for all they know. And they're basically just like gambling off of that at this point because they have no info B main. Zipan's playing like Contact Heaven. He overextends here and just like dry peeks it, which gets him killed. And then they split onto the site after this.
And we'll see sort of like the classic, like good fundamentals from G2 as well in the terms of spacing and how they entry into the site, clearing position by position. But again, like I have to say, I was really impressed with FPX's resilience on the individuals and just how they dealt with a lot of these situations.
Yeah, I think they definitely looked a lot better, like, in the post plants and retakes and stuff like that. It just felt like their early round setups, they didn't have enough information to play the entire round out, and they kind of shot themselves in the foot in that sense.
Yeah, I feel like G2, like I really want to see a lot. I want to see some of the NA teams playing G2 just because I want to see like what just a complete change of style would look like in terms of the approach. Because Europe plays like Europe right now, and I'm just very curious as to like, is there a way that's let's say that some of the North American teams are playing that would exploit this a little bit more? Obviously, like we have much more prevalence from Jet and just various other things, more default heavy stuff from NA. So there's just like a very big difference. It's very hard to even understand like who is actually playing the most optimally. It's a difficult one, especially in Valorant because it's Valorant's so much about styles versus styles. There's not necessarily a truly optimal way to play. So with that said, we are going to be moving into the final round. It's no spoilers.
And I think this
And
is FPX, like, they play heavy mid again to try to get more info.
it's always like pretty interesting from a calling perspective. Like, what round do you call if you're in GT shoes here? They're gonna call just like an A contact. So you can see it on the minimap right now, just basically everyone there with artists lurking in mids. And artist tends to on a lot of these like heavy A contact plays. Artist does have this tendency to try to lurk up ropes to heaven late, which is quite interesting. Um, but it seems to be oftentimes fairly effective.
Yeah,
What do you
and
think is the argument of having the Rays do that? Is it really just because of the util for the post plan? Or
I think, especially when you're going up against a Sage, one, it's good because he can blast pack that wall down twice and then go through ropes. I think Artis is just generally like very aware because this is a strat that G2 runs fairly often. This like A contact with the late lurk from him, and then we've seen, I can't remember which team they played, but it was on this map, obviously, and then we saw like he was smoked off heaven, then had that raise nade for the post plan on a site from heaven they threw and won the round. So that is like a good use of like the raise utility, or if he had his ult or something like that. I think they just trust artists, like even if he's lurking, to cause a lot of chaos in mid or like be a nuisance in heaven when the other team's trying to retake.
yeah, he does find good timings from it, and he's quite clutch, obviously too. So that's really helpful. But yeah, pretty straightforward stuff. The double cages. The boom will go in there as a response from Zipan to get some info, and out they go, dash in towards the site behind screens. And they get the 2 instant kills, which is never a good sign. And at this point, it's there's because of those 2 insta kills, it's not like look how deep David P is. He's just ulting spawn. That really just tells you a lot about how good their position is right now.
Yeah, and you could tell like G2 were just completely over it. Like even though they had a chance to kind of throw that there, they just wanted to close it out after they got those first 2 kills, which fits their style a lot.
Yeah, for sure. They are like a just a what is the thing I'm thinking of? Like a wrecking ball. I don't know. Just
Yeah,
gonna
lots of
pile through you.
momentum.
Bulldozer. That's the one. There we go. Right. So yeah, I feel like ultimately again, I felt very impressed with FPX because I think you can have like the best strategical and tactical approach, but your individuals have to have a good sense for the fundamentals and how to act intuitively in some of these highly pressured situations. And that's something that FPX did pretty well. And one of the things I think that for me is a focus, like why I'm focused on that is because G2 is a team that does thrive in those situations, and that's one of the huge differences that they have against a lot of other top teams is that their individuals are insanely good in those spots. So I feel like you have to be fairly close to match them in those positions because especially on the attack, they're able to force those positions to happen, and that's kind of how their contact style works. Is that they just force the action in that way. So your individuals have to be able to deal with those really difficult spots, which might not come down to your setups being successful. It might just come down to you having really good, peaking and really good understanding of how to play off of your teammate. So FPX impressed me a lot there, especially old man Boomer Angel in that sense too. I think he's really doing a great job in terms of leading the team and what he's able to innovate with either the Brim or the Omen picks, typically going for the smokers.
He's been entering on Brimstone. It's insane watching him unbind. Like he's so aggressive. Even though like obviously a lot of their rounds rely on his smokes, but he'll still be like taking really aggro fights.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting too because I do wonder if FPX will be able to sort of figure out G2 because it doesn't seem like they are missing anything in terms of their fundamentals to a degree that would hurt them in the sense that how should I put this? I feel like they have the core that exists right now that it's really just about changing maybe their strategical or tactical approach, tweaking that to be that's going to be help them to be able to consistently have better results against G2. I feel like the fundamental aspects are there in terms of the individuals and how as we mentioned how well they play intuitively in the game. So I'm really curious like are is this team FBX are they going to prove that they're actually more intelligent than G2? And they're actually able to counter G2's playstyle. Is that something that you see is possible, Mike?
I think it just depends because I think part of it as well is I think not on this map specifically, but on like bind, I think FPX is kind of readable in their approach, and that showed in this finals. But I think they definitely do a lot of things well, like especially when Angel like calls aggressive control setups. That's something I would have liked to see more this map because they were so like the only areas they really controlled this entire defender half was like B main a few times, and they kept getting that control, but that's because G2 were kind of allowing them, right? They weren't really worried about just dry hitting B or contacting through B main or like splitting someone through B main when they take heaven control. So it would have been nice to see if they, like, there's a few times where they got aggressive at A. It would have been nice to see them expand on that or maybe have some opening setups at mid that might allow you to get a pick. It's just kind of hard because I think FPX more than a lot of teams don't really have an opper, and a lot of teams, especially in NA on split, kind of rely on your opper getting like some sort of opening somewhere as a defender because you can peek aggressively A main as like Jet, dash away, peek aggressively B main, mid, it's all the same, get out for free. So I kind of feel like it's a lot harder to get an opening on split when you don't have like an opper like that.
I do wonder as well if a composition change might be helpful in terms of how G2 are playing the game, and are we thinking about adding in a killjoy to try and have more control over the space? Like, are you thinking more about, screw it, we want to actually focus on having a very good defensive side against G2, and we won't worry as much about our attacking side? And if that's your philosophy, how do you like what changes would you make? Do you add the killjoy in there somehow? Like, do you either swap it for the sage, or do you just keep the sage, just like have a very defense heavy lineup?
Yeah, I think you could definitely do something like that, especially like because like I was saying earlier, Killjoy would have helped a lot when they were worried about like mid, because obviously you could leave like the alarm bot and vents or something like that and also have a molly in there, so then you can buy back that space for a certain amount of time or commit them too early into the hit, rather if they would like go back and reset, but the volley makes them commit. It's I'm still like up in the air on which I think like which maps Killjoy's good on, but that would be a decent change. The Sage was something I think they tried that was kind of new because Xiao's normally playing Sova, but I think they kind of realized before that he wasn't as effective as Sova on this map compared to others, just because you're limited by just the varying factors with Sova on this map that we've kind of talked about before. I think the one thing FPX, like, even though we're talking about them changing comp, I think them having like a consistent comp on like every map besides like Angel switching between Brim and Omen helps them a lot in like their strategy and their structure, but they might have to adjust some stuff for G2, but I'm not sure.
Well, I think that's a good note to close things out. We're about to hit the hour, so we have managed to make it a timely show that actually adheres to the typical schedule that we're trying to set for ourselves, as opposed to going over or under or whatever. We're getting better at this. So, guys in the chat, thank you for joining us. This obviously is a new time of day for us to do this show. We're going to be aiming to do this in the future as well, the same time to better enable us to catch people from Europe as well as North America and any other regions. I'm actually not familiar with time zones in the other regions, but all are welcome. And hopefully, this is generally a better time, I suppose, is what I'm getting at to for you guys to catch things live. But if you didn't catch it live, if you joined it in right at the end, or this is the first time you're seeing this kind of content, we of course have a YouTube, and you can go and check out our YouTube channel for all of the VODs of all of the content from this channel. And we will typically upload our content one day after it has been broadcasted live. So this VOD will go up in about 24 hours from now on our YouTube channel. So you can check that out. We have a Twitter as well that will, that's where you can ask us questions, or you can see, which guest is going to be coming up onto the next talk show. And also, typically we'll have a lot of chat going on in the Discord channel. So make sure to join that too, where you can find people to play the game with or chat about pro matches. Or again, as another way to ask us questions and get involved with the show as we are kind of building the community more every day. So thank you all for being a part of all of this. And we will see you on Saturday, but make sure to tune in again to the Twitter so that you can get get an eye on who we actually have. We have a special guest coming up Saturday. We have lots of special guests, and that will be revealed, I think, tomorrow. Is that correct? Today. Okay, we're revealing that today. So keep your eyes on Twitter. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in once more, and we'll see you on Saturday for the Immortal Minds talk show.